So thank you for doing this, and this is going to be shown in Manchester, and you're a Chicagoan, aren't you?
It's pretty close to
I
Manchester, I have to say.
I always think they're similar places.
Very
There's an
similar.
openness. I mean, one of the most annoying things that's happened to me all year was going in a bookshop in O'Hare Airport, and they didn't know who Saul Bellow was, and didn't have a Saul. Not having a Saul Bellow book in the Chicago airport bookshop seemed to me shocking. But Bellow always talks about the hospitality and the openness of Chicagoans. Is that
It's
true?
the working class, you know. It's a working class that works hard and plays hard, you know, and that's why I have these great clubs and great legacies, you know. Especially like Chicago with the blues, you know, it's all about the working class, that music.
Are you working class?
Well, it's a good question. I don't know if I qualify. My father was a musician, and my mother was sort of like a high school washout who ended up in a good job eventually. And my stepmother was a stewardess, so I don't know if that classified.
Did your mum and dad own their own house?
Sorta.
Sort of. Okay.
Yeah. Sorta. They were paying for it, but yeah, we were sort of lower middle class.
Which is the usual thing in rock and roll. There's this image in rock and roll that we're all meant to be working class, but actually very few people are. Elvis Presley was. I mean, I had a working class band, which is a nightmare because as soon as they have success, it's like a bank robbery and they fuck off. Whereas middle class, even low middle class boys have a certain amount of career ethic. You've got career ethic. You stuck at it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, through the years I've been criticized for working so hard, as if this is sort of a negative thing, and I've always kind of, in my city, this is what you do. You work till you die. Work is honorable. To work is to be honorable.
My band were called Happy Mondays. You know what the phrase Happy Mondays means?
Mm-mm.
It means you're out of work. Because it's a happy Monday because you're not going to go to work. That's just...
I have a great Happy Monday story.
Go on. Good.
You like me?
Yes.
It's indirect, but it's a good one. Happy Mondays were in Chicago opening for the Pixies, and this is when the Pixies were white hot off the Doolittle album. And apparently Sean Ryder, the singer, had caught some sort of VD and clap, and they were waiting for a doctor to give him a shot or something. So the Mondays went on an hour and a half late. So by the time they walked on stage, the crowd was hating them because everybody was there to see the Pixies.
Yeah.
And the Mondays came on, and the crowd booed. And they kind of laughed, like, okay, whatever. And they started playing, doing their thing. First song, boo, 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 boo. Second song, little less boos. Third song, kind of quiet. Fourth song, people started laughing along with the band. By the end of the show, totally sold. People, applause, encore, unbelievable. Never seen anything like it in my life.
Well, that's the openness of the Chicagoan personality. They can cope. God bless. God bless. There are lots worse Sean Ryder stories than that. Like, I'll tell you them, but not here. I had a very bad moment earlier this week, which is for the other interview we've done here with Steve Jones.
Mm-hmm.
And I discovered that my hero, the Pistols changed my life, blah, 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 was a big Boston fan. Someone told me that you're a Boston fan as well. Oh, my God. I was saying this
Twice in 1 week. What's going to happen?
I was saying this to Seymour Stein today, and Seymour is very open to lots of rock and roll, as you know. He's a great man of music, and he went, "I'll take anything, but not fucking Boston." Were there redeeming features of Boston, or do you?
One of the greatest guitar sounds ever. See, you gotta understand this coming from two guitarists.
Okay.
One of the seminal guitar sounds. It was sort of Titanic, and it really presaged big guitar sounds. They were one of the first bands that really got that power.
You see, I like to think of you and your success and your art as in some way owing a little bit to the Joy Division Cure period that I grew up with as well.
Absolutely. But
Boston's we got Boston. Well, not just Boston. What the fuck is this Black Sabbath stuff?
Again, the guitar sound. For me, okay, here's one of my apocryphal stories. I had an uncle, now long passed away, but he was a drummer, and he had a really good stereo. And when he wasn't around, I'd sneak in the back of my grandma's house and play a stereo. And he had Jethro Tull, Black Sabbath. I didn't know who these bands were. So 8 years old, I put on Black Sabbath, and the sound of the album just does my head in. The sound of the two guitars and the sound of the doubled vocals, which really, some not too many years later became my prototype sound. It's a sort of an excitement sound that I can't explain, but it's the sound. It's the sound. Now with Sabbath, it's like, suburban doom and gloom and all that stuff, and that really actually sort of worked where I grew up. We didn't get too into the politics, but you have to understand is that in terms of musical education, in terms of a critical review, we didn't have any. To somebody in the suburbs of America in the 70s, Black Sabbath was alternative music. We didn't know about this other music, and really it was the Sex Pistols that was the first band that cracked the consciousness that there was this other music, and only because it was controversial. It was like this, like the aliens are coming and everybody hide your kids, because the Pistols were followed around America as a sort of like end of Western civilization thing, and it actually cracked the consciousness of where I grew up, which is an hour outside of Chicago. When you only had 3-4 TV channels. So to reach that level of critical mass on the media, it had to be something. But it was the first indication that it was something other than what we knew.
Yeah, I mean, I always think about that for me there was a moment when an old junkie friend of mine from college told me about this album I had to go and get. This was in December '75, and it was Patti Smith's Horses. And buying that and thinking, my God, there's something else other than all that early 70s shit.
Yeah.
But the Pistols, of course, it was McLaren's big decision not to play the major markets. So he wasn't going to come and play New York or LA or Chicago.
Right.
But you heard about him on the news.
It was on the evening news as if it was the end of the world. I remember I can see the footage. It's like them getting off some plane, and it was like now of course I saw that footage, you laugh because they're all like, what bloody hell, what the fuck,
Yeah.
But at the time it looked like aliens. I mean, they were from England, They were scabbed. And the names, Sid Vicious, Johnny Rotten,
That's true.
Where you're like 10 years old, you're like, oh, what is that? And of course, it didn't get played on the radio. There was no support of that. So it was only theoretical. It was a name. It was the Sex Pistols. I mean, it sounded dangerous.
Very well chosen. We won't go to the Pistols now, but what I wanted to talk to you mostly about in this next in this half hour we got together is about the music business, because we very rarely ask our musicians what they think of us. Mm-hmm. We often say what we think about our musicians. They're a fucking nightmare, and wouldn't this be a great industry with no musicians? Have you ever heard us talk about it like that?
Have I heard industry people talk about musicians? I think because I've been so business savvy, many people in the industry have sort of kind of yuck, you're one of us. You're not like one of them. You're not a fucking idiot like the rest of them.
Yes.
So I kind of got some insight into the world a little bit.
So I'm wondering whether, that 8-year-old kid in love with the sound of music pouring
Black
into
Sabbath.
him.
And the sound of
Black Sabbath. I don't
Just
mind.
say it.
I'll say the sound of Black Sabbath pouring into you. There is, in the end, there's nothing like a great guitar sound. If it's Boston or Black Sabbath, I just don't mind, or even Steve Jones. You've now been working in the business, as it were, for what, 15, 20 years?
15 years, yeah.
15 years particularly, but
Plus, I grew up, my father was in the business, so, yeah.
Have you learnt to like music as much, or have you gone on? How has it changed your feelings about this thing called music, actually being in the business of making music?
It totally destroyed every beautiful idealism I had about music, and it's been sort of a reclamation project to actually understand that it's sort of like the Soviet Empire. It's impersonal in its dominion, and that there's a sort of a way to. It's like you can't. Like a kid wrote me an email today. He's in a band that just got signed, and what can I do? And I said, there's nothing you can do. It's like Vegas. You're born to lose. The business is set against you. That's been all my experiences. You're going to lose, so the question is, can you get out of it what you want? Why you can get out of it? Why you can get something out of it.
Explain to me why. This is where it gets confusing. In the end, for the people watching this who are workers in this industry,
Mm-hmm.
who we all know, I find it very strange. I think people who work in the music industry actually love music.
Yeah, they generally
do.
do.
They do,
Yeah.
which is very. I don't think the public don't understand that. The public think that musicians love music, and the people in the suits love money. It's often the reverse in some strange way. But I won't push that too far, really. But the one thing that one would say is that why is it that the musician loses? Because in the end, without what we all know, I mean, I'm the first one to tell you that musicians, all of you, you're all fucking idiots, all of you, but you're given this godlike gift, which none of us have. I can't write a fucking song, I can write a tune, and your songs, your tunes, your lyrics, this is you and the rest of your clever compatriots, are what makes our lives. And it's a weird thing. We know we can't do that, we know you can. So why then should the industry, which needs this beauty, why should it fuck you? Why does that happen?
Why do you get fucked over?
Yes.
Well, I'd start with the basic premise. The music business is a system that sort of operates without a head. You know, you can sort of move different people in and out, but it sort of has its own inertia. No one even knows how it got created. The original imprints of like hustlers and bootleggers and whatever else is still sort of in the cracks, no matter how many guys in Prada they stick in there. Okay, so start there. Secondarily, most artists' career...
Is that guys in Prada, you said?
Guys wearing Prada.
Yeah, I like that. That's wonderful. Okay.
Okay. Next, most artists' career arc is 3 to 4 years. A lot of artists don't even understand what they have, and by the time they figure it out, they're too drug-addled or whatever to get it back. So this creates a general tone of exploitation, gotta get it while it's hot, gotta move it. So that's the sort of basic template. Now, let's talk impersonally. Let's say you have, Johnny who, suddenly sprouts up out of Texas and has an immense talent and is the next, so-and-so. Kurt or Courtney or Johnny. Doesn't matter. It's hard for somebody not to think that kid's got those 4 years. It's the rock and roll as an archetype. It's live fast, die young.
Leave a good-looking corpse.
Leave a good-looking corpse. So no one's really thinking about maturing. There's no business model in place to think that the best work can come in 10 years, 20 years. Any other business would say, here's a 1 in a billion haystack needle, wow. Let's do everything in our power to protect this, nurture it, and have it grow into something wonderful. No, it's the opposite. What do we got to do to strip this of whatever it's got? And then, so let's just set Johnny aside.
Yes.
You strip Johnny of his essence. Let's go out and run out and find 50 people who kind of look like Johnny.
Yeah, where's the next Johnny, please?
Right, and totally water down Johnny, so that Johnny can't even be Johnny, because Johnny starts to look like an imitation of himself. And then Johnny's got to figure it all out. Johnny's got to resurrect himself stage 2. Then it's you can't do that, or we're not interested, and now Johnny wants too big in advance. We don't have a big enough upside.
Yeah. So,
speaking now personally, mathematically speaking, I am 1 in 100 million. In terms of the amount of records I've sold, in terms of what I've accomplished. I'm 100 million. Talk to anybody in the music business, they don't look at me as a 1 in 100 million. They look at me as the number one nightmare. Because I know what I'm doing, I know what I'm looking for.
You have opinions.
I have opinions. So, it's not predicated on partnership, which is what you based your company on. It's based on how do I take something from you. Now, most artists, I will agree, are total fucking assholes. They are. They're out of control. They're egoistic. But there is no one there, like you would have in any business, to nurture the person into a point of maturity. If you're a savant and everything you touch turns to gold, or at least gold in your impression, and suddenly you've got a Ferrari, why wouldn't you think you're some sort of Christ child? There's no one there to say, in baseball or in any other sports, what do? They hire former players
to mentor
the talent, to sit there and say, that's not how you do it. Don't do it like that. They have rules, they have decorum. Not in our business. I'm still seeing photos I took when I was 24 where I look like shit. There was no one to stand there and say, Don't do that. Don't wear that. You look like a fucking poof. You see what I'm saying? You got to learn it by yourself. So what that does is creates a culture of distrust. So even if you come along with the best intentions, I'm not listening to you. Fuck you. You don't know shit. You didn't find me. I made me. And that's it. And it's always contentious down the road. Always. So rather than create a business model that nurtures and everybody benefits from, it's like, no. And they work, sorry, one more thing.
No, please.
They work their insecurities against you.
Who work? The company?
I've heard it all. You know, you got to hurry up. You got to do this. If you don't, I literally once sat in a management meeting. The guy said to me, not kidding, someone very well known in the music business said to me, this is Smashing Pumpkins now. This is not me solo in some art project. Smashing Pumpkins said, when do you want to put out your new album? And I said the date. And he says, gosh, I think that's when Radiohead's putting their album out. I wouldn't suggest that's a good date. This guy wants to manage me, and he's already telling me to be afraid. The whole culture is be afraid, don't compete. You know, if you come in number 2, God forbid. So if you're constantly told to manipulate, yes, what are you going to do? You become a manipulator. There's no choice.
Not only do we manipulate you so you become manipulators, there's also the other crime which you touched on earlier, is we do, the phrase is, I remember Jonathan King using the phrase, we infantilize our artists. Mm-hmm. We do, don't we? We turn you into children. We turn you into spoiled children because we try to do too much, but then without any thought.
I haven't had that experience.
Yeah?
I didn't get the spoiled children bit.
Oh. What about managers? I mean, I always think that's not too. I'm not being personal at first, but theoretical. The relationship between the manager and the record company and the manager and the artist, if that works,
it's bullshit.
It doesn't.
It's bullshit. Okay, here's a tangent for you. Back to my theory about 4 or 5 years, the artist.
Yes.
The manager wants to be in business because one day they want to work for a label or they want to have their own marketing company. So their arc's 30 years. The lawyer's arc is 30 years. The accountant's arc is 30 years. Now,
Yes.
who are you going to be beholden to? Are you going to be beholden to the artist who might be around 4 or 5 years, possibly 10? Or are you going to make sure that the guy you're going to play golf with, who you're going to need to work with for the next 25 years, whose side are you on? I've had people tell me, I can't go as far as you want me to go in this negotiation because it'll destroy my relationship with this particular person. So they're not an advocate. This was one of my biggest wake-up calls in the music business, is that the people I hire that are supposed to be on my side are really not on anybody's side. They're on their side. And you're paying for advocacy to a point, but you're not getting 100% advocacy.
I'm shocked. The good managers, in my experience, and I've known some really great ones, they are 150% for their artist.
I wish you'd write their names down because I haven't run into them
I
yet.
think most of them are dead, actually, but they were wonderful. Those are very special. I can't imagine the other thing. I mean, I've fallen out very badly with some managers simply because they were there just for their artist and didn't mind fucking me over because they were doing it for their artist. And
Right.
I fucking hated it at the time. I look back at it and think, you did your job. Maybe that's a British thing more than American.
It's mind-boggling to me.
Would you say then maybe you're coloured by having not had a great experience of managers? He said, grinning, knowing that you didn't.
What do I say?
What do you say? Okay.
We want to sort of find something, a rainbow in this?
No.
or-
It's raining in both our hearts.
I mean, you're talking to somebody who's had some pretty interesting experiences. I've woken up in the morning. I've had my one manager quit in the middle of the night and release a press release saying, "I'm making her sick."
Wasn't that Mrs. Osborne?
Mrs. Osborne. I had one manager tell me that he was quitting the music business because I was burning him out and he couldn't handle it anymore. And 6 weeks later, he announced he had signed a deal to start a label, and he'd been negotiating it before he told me that he was quitting the music business.
So, I'm not being rude now, but
No, please.
But there must be something difficult about you. Not that I'm.
Sure.
What's difficult?
I'm smart.
Okay.
I'm smart.
Okay.
My mother raised me to be smart. I won't play stupid.
Okay.
I won't do the lying in the grass and I'm really all fucked up on drugs and gee, I don't know what I'm doing. I'll tell you right to your face. Like, for example, Sharon Osbourne, the Emperor has no clothes. Doesn't know what she's doing. Has gotten by for 20-something years on Aussie juice. You know, literally and figuratively.
She's funny on TV.
She's hysterical. But as a manager, doesn't know what she's doing. Totally clueless. Does not know.
If you could,
and God forbid you actually mention that she doesn't know this. It's like shit, kid. What do you mean I don't know what I'm doing? Manager ranks attract the biggest posers in the world, the biggest and the worst.
Well, because
posers.
because there's even less than a record company. There's no natural career progression. You just turn up, don't you? You just turn up with some kid. I mean, to me, my favourite managers, they grew up with their bands. They were there at the beginning. You know, they're the fifth member, the sixth member. If I look at my old late partner Rob Gretton, he was the fifth member of Joy Division and the fifth member of New Order. And Mr. Saville, our designer, now says that with Rob gone, you realise, strangely, just how much of the artistic part of Joy Division / New Order was their fifth member. Now that's a great manager.
I've always had this idealized vision that the manager would be the one saying, I know you can do it. Sort of a paternal figure, you know. I know you've got it, don't listen to them, you can do it. I've had to be that guy for myself. So that's something I have not experienced in this life.
I always think, as a label boss, I don't do anything, but the one thing I know I do is I tell my boys that they're fucking brilliant, because they are, or I wouldn't be with them.
No, see, I've only gotten the opposite.
How can you get the opposite?
That's the way it's worked for me. It's the old, you know, there's like a play that's running in Chicago, I Love You Now Change. You know, that's how I've always felt. It's like, we like you the way you are, but, you know, can you do this, but, you know, that's been my experience.
Why can't they just let you get on with it, in your opinion? You write fabulous music, you write albums that sell loads.
That's a really good question. It seems to me, it's like this, like I would say this about my bandmates, you know, because like I've had various bandmates who wanted to go solo. Even the people standing 5 feet away from me on stage think they know my job, but they don't. It's very different to stand in the middle and have all that energy coming at you and all that projection and all that failure and all that hope and dream. So some guy sitting in office looks at me and says, hey, if I was you, I would do X. It's general good intentions. It's like, if you want to sell more bread, you really should, you know, make it look a little more brown, you know? So they look at me and they say, you know, tone down the nasally voice a little bit and turn up the guitars. I mean, that seems normal. When we first started, it was, your guitars are too loud, right? That was the first one, okay? Then it was, your songs are too long. Then it was, your solos are too long. Then it was, your guitars aren't loud enough, right? Then it was, you're too crazy. Then it's, you're not crazy enough. It's always it's the same culture of using insecurity or who you're not as some sort of motivating force.
It makes me feel very good, because I always say that I don't do anything with my musicians, because I wouldn't dream of telling them about that. Because that, if they're not doing it right, how the fuck am I going to do it right? What do I know? But is there any role for a record company for you? It should be, you've always described it there as being someone there just to say, you're fucking great, get on with it.
I haven't had that experience, so...
There's no wonder you're pissed off.
Yeah. But, to me, I view, you know, I don't mean to sound all negative. I have had some good experiences, but the overall effect has been negative. And I view my relationship with the record company, or any record company at this point, as a partnership and a facilitator. I try to listen to what they want and in a very adult way address what I think I'm capable of, and not give them any sort of bones about what I am and aren't going to do, and just try to be really straight about it, and that seems to work fine.
Okay, to bring this section to a conclusion, then I've got 2 little more bits to do. Mm-hmm. How people watching this, who are basically record executives, people, and managers and the rest of it, from the difficult but talented musician's point of view, how could we do what we do better and sell more records?
First thing I would do is bring in mentoring. There should be every band should have a mentor from the beginning. So the minute you sign a band, you should try to find somebody that the band will respect, that the band can dialogue their fears about. They can very openly deal with their drug issues, because almost every band has some form of drug issues, and somebody that can say, that's probably not the best idea, more like a good mate. Not and the person would have to sort of be almost like an independent contractor. They couldn't be seen as sort of trying to manipulate the band for the label's ends. They have to be somebody that everybody would agree would be in the best interest to work and sort of be a liaison with, but ultimately represent the band more than the. Especially now, there's no A&R is diminished.
A&R has come to mean signing bands. In the old days, it meant growing the band, nurturing the band. Didn't it?
So they need to hire people to be there for the artist, to take them through the early machinations, because the original imprint that a band receives in the music industry, especially in this media-saturated culture, never leaves. Never leaves. I'll give you a small story. I was talking to this artist recently, 16 years old. There was some talk about me possibly helping writing songs. And I said to the artist, what are you listening to? And she said, Typo Negative and Marilyn Manson and all this stuff. And I said, well, why do your demos sound pop? Well, I'm going to kind of do what they want me to do first, and then if it's successful, I'll get to do what I want to do. I said, do you honestly believe that's to be true? So then I call the label people back up and I say, why can't we figure out a way to sort of align this talent with the interests? Because there's a bigger upside there. It's like, gee, novel idea.
Well, it's this idea that when I go over the years with some record company person to a gig, and they say, I don't hear the single yet. Or on an album, I don't hear the single yet. And my response is always, because they haven't fucking written it yet. All the great groups, when did you write the single that really turned people around? Was that on your second
album?
Second album. It's always second, sometimes third album. You do not write Within You Without You on the first album. You don't write Love Will Tear Us Apart on the first album. Why does everyone think that the band should have the hit single? And the great bands, it always comes later, doesn't it? And
what's completely underestimated is that the band must learn to have faith in itself, and there's a congealing energetic that happens when the band gets out in front of the audience, just like test marketing. Hello, the band has to have a record out, get some feedback from the audience, play some shows, and figure out who the hell they really are. Like anybody, look, if you went out with a rooster on your head, you'd get looked at, but you wouldn't get looked at in the way you would like to.
Yes.
And you find if you put on a nice tie, the sexy girl at the bar looks at you twice. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that you're going to wear the sexy tie the next day.
Not the rooster.
Right. Well, it's the same thing in the music business. You start with a sort of intellectual premise, but until you try it in the marketplace, you kind of figure out who you are. It reinforces certain ideas about yourself, and you think, let's kind of forget about some of those. Every band does it. They usually do it very quietly because they don't want people to see that they're sweating out the stuff that they missed.
And even going into studio, that process for a young band, having been in a crappy rehearsal room, you learn about your music through listening to it in that process, don't you?
Absolutely. And what I don't understand about the music business is it doesn't apply most of the theories that work in every other business.
True.
It boggles the mind. It boggles the mind that somehow there's different rock and roll business rules that somehow are supposed to work. Now they're doing the opposite. They're trying to bring in corporate structure and squeeze the life out of things in quarters before talent has a time to develop. Somebody in the industry told me this great story. They were in a meeting with some Seagram's people or something, and somebody said, "Why is the record not coming out in the fourth quarter?" And the guy said, "Well, the lead singer's in rehab." And the guy slams his fist on the table and says, "Well, we need this record out in the fourth quarter." It's like, well,
yes.
You know what I mean? It's like it's just not that kind of business.
The new pressures. Tell me, you mentioned something before about what I think they call LSS, lead singer syndrome.
Yeah.
You talk about being a lead singer. I like LSS.
Here comes the tough questions.
No, it's not a tough question. It's actually, this is not the tough one at all. This is more of an artistic musing that I have, that every other art form that we all love in the Western world and the Eastern world is an individual art form. where the individual, the painter, the architect, you know, even classical music, it's Mozart, it's Beethoven.
Right.
And yet the world that we love, the best stuff is created by groups. And I can say this to you because I know you've talked about this.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more.
Which is bizarre. I mean, it's now interesting that you're going solo, and having this solo album have been out this summer, and it's already being loved by many, many people. I don't want to go there. This isn't a PR stunt, this one, but having been so conscious and talked so eloquently about the fact that what a bizarre art form where a group of people are always better than the individual parts, that you've gone solo. Do you go solo with trepidation, knowing the value of the input of other people?
Well, because I still surrounded myself with people, you know. I surrounded myself with people I worked with before and friends to get that kind of feedback. But I didn't have necessarily the visceral feedback that one has in a band.
But it's a weird thing, isn't it? The group is always, I mean, solo projects, real solo projects, are usually nothing like the creation of the group, are they?
But even some of the great solo work, like Bowie's work, it had everything to do with Mick Ronson, you know, or Carlos Alomar. So it's very rarely solo. You know, I think Nick Drake was solo. You know, but outside of that, most people, there's always somebody, or you know, or it's the producer Tony Visconti, working with you know, T-Rex.
Now, producers, I always think that about record companies, to get back to that bit, I always think the one thing record companies do, for better or worse, is push their artists towards the right or the wrong producer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually the one creative thing that we do. And if you get it right, it's a wonderful thing. If you get it wrong, it's a fuck up.
Right.
Who's been important to you in producers?
Well, I've been lucky. I've worked with two of the best. Butch Vig, who we worked with, who's now known more for Garbage, but we worked with him when he had his own studio up in Madison, Wisconsin, and it was out in the middle of nowhere. And we went to him because he had a great kick drum sound. And then subsequently ended up working with the English producer Flood, who's, you know, one of the most groundbreaking producers in the '90s. And then also Alan Mulder, who's, you know, was responsible for My Bloody Valentine and all these other wonderful things. So, been really, really lucky, incredibly lucky, and learned from the best for sure.
But that's one of the reasons you've had a great career.
Absolutely. So that's the thing. I mean, I would love to sit here and say it's all me, 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 but it's not. I mean, these men are geniuses. You know.
Okay, I'm going to go down one last avenue just because I want to do this, and then you can say whatever we want. But just the last avenue, and this is getting personal, but it's a story, isn't it? The story that I heard the other day about Mr. Atencio, my partner for many years here in Los Angeles, the former manager of Joy Division, New Order, Jane's Addiction. Which other fucking bands has he managed? What's Gwen's band called? No Doubt. That's right. So Tom does all these things, and I've worked with Tom for a long time, but I didn't know that Tom, once upon a time, many years ago, thought he was managing Hole. And he did. And he decided that the future for Courtney was to give her $750. It
was actually $1,100, but I didn't want to correct him.
No. Well, okay. So just explain to me.
You know why? You know why it was $1,100? Because she wanted me to give her the money to give back to him.
Okay. Because she was going to screw him. Because not screw him, but she was going to screw you, wasn't she? No. Okay. The idea was she would go to Chicago to get her band support out on your tour. Is that right? You tell me.
No, that's she. No, she wanted to come. She was in love with me and wanted to come to Chicago to see me, and that's what she told him to get the money.
Oh, she told Tom, "I'll go to Chicago and get on the Smashing Pumpkins tour."
Yeah, I'll go to Chicago and fuck Billy Corgan on a Smashing Pumpkins tour. What he didn't know is she'd already fucked me.
Okay, fine. So he gives her $1,100.
She didn't have to come to Chicago to get on the tour.
Oh, so she came to Chicago, and
I wasn't expecting her.
Didn't she phone you saying should she come?
She called me and said, "Well, how do you feel about me coming to Chicago?" And I sort of ambivalently said, "Sure." And by which she informed me, "I'm already here. I'm at the airport."
And you're with your girlfriend at this point?
Well, my girlfriend at the time wasn't aware of this concept. So I was put in this sort of all of a sudden awkward double bind. Plus, you know, I love Courtney, but, you know, Courtney's not the type of girl you just say, "Okay, just sit down for a moment, let's just be calm and think this through." It wasn't really like that. So she showed up looking very sexy, you know, ready to rock, as we say in Pumpkin's world. And I kind of freaked out and tossed her out on her ear
Yes.
not thinking that she was going to walk 5 minutes down the block and run into Kurt Cobain, and the rest is history.
Which she did.
Yeah.
That was when she met Kurt after she threw her out of the hotel.
Well, she'd been with Kurt on some level previously, but it wasn't sort of a full-blown romance. And then she hooked up with Kurt that night. They were together, and then the next morning she called me asking me if she could come over to my place, by which I said, well, if you slept with, rock star A, you can't come back to rock star B. And she, I think she went off to Minneapolis, and then next thing you know, they were getting married, and it was all this, thing.
Well, the next thing I heard is that Atencio was watching TV 3 weeks later, and suddenly he sees Kurt being interviewed at this very early MTV interview, and there, right next to him, is his former protege, Courtney, and he realizes that that's the end of his $1,100. It's the end of, because she'll obviously become managed by Kurt's management, and the whole thing would go. Yeah, and he was right.
So he's to blame.
Well, he's $1,100 out.
Yeah, but he also ruined my romance.
Okay, well, I wonder if we should end on this note of satirizing Mr. Atencio, or we should give you a last chance to say something about the music business. It is a real. Do you find it fun to talk about this? The fact that you're probably not asked about. You asked about your music and the rest of it, but as you say, you're business savvy.
Yeah, I love the business. I think.
Say that again. Say that again.
I love the business.
Good. Fine.
Yeah, I hate it and I love it, but I do love it. I think. Look, there's been lots of abuses going back to ripping artists off on their songwriting royalties and all these things. Hey, 75% of mechanicals. Need I say more?
Yes.
One of my favorite concepts of all time.
Yes.
But
where did that come from?
that's somebody thought that up doing some cocaine going down the PCH, man, because that's a good one.
You know the old 90% one?
No, I don't know the 90%. I know the 75%.
Oh, the 90% is any deal is 90%. And you go, why? And they say, because it's always been that way. That's when I first started. You go, it's shellac. It was for breakages in the 50s.
Right.
The fact that we got rid of shellac in 57...
Right.
Emerging
technologies.
Yes,
I love that.
Yes. That's
and then, of course, there's the known universe.
Yes, the known universe.
I love and hate the business, and we could go on about all the wrongs. But what's incredible is I think that the internet is really going to provide some fresh opportunities. And ironically, I think the music business will have to get back in the artist development end of things, because that's really going to be the only thing that's going to be the loggerhead for them, to be the difference between just signing with Coca-Cola. And I've been saying this for years, and no one will believe me, but I'm going to say it now since we've got it on videotape, is at some point Coca-Cola is going to say, well, why do we need record company X? Why don't we just hire Tony, because he can tell us how to deal with these fucking freaks, and let's just throw $20 million at them. It's nothing to us. It's in our marketing budget. If a corporation guarantees an artist a quadruple platinum record worth of money without having to sell a record, why the fuck is the artist going to try to sell the record? They'll say, show me where to sign. I can do whatever I want to do. Oh yeah, all you got to do is make 12 personal appearances, appear in the commercial, and when the Beyoncés and all them start jumping ship and going corporate, the only thing that's going to stop it is the artist development end of the record business, because that's going to be the only thing they've got. Where say, we've got the brain trust to help steer you into future successes. And there will be a coming of age for the music business where they're going to have to decide what is really valuable. And it's going to come down to their relationship with artists. And this sort of leftover bootlegger mentality of exploitation is going to have to go out the window. Now, there's always going to be some sucker straight out of fucking wherever, the ghetto or the middle class neighborhood, that's willing to sign on the dotted line. But sooner or later, somebody's going to figure out, well, why don't we just skip that part? And it's going to be a cash and carry business. And then everyone's going to be screwed. And we won't be talking about the music business. We'll be talking about Coca-Cola and Microsoft.
Billy, thank you. Last question. Would you like to run a record company?
No. I would like to develop artists. I think that's an honorable business. But running a record company ultimately leads to cocaine off of hookers' asses, and I'm really not interested. but I can't. I
That's
can't
why.
speak for
That's
you.
why I'm in the business. For heaven's sake, I can't think of anything nicer to do. Billy, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, sir.